All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Do give me a signal that you can hear me so that I know that we are doing okay. Okay, good. There's a little bit of lag, so I think I'm getting the response a little bit late. Um, but I'm glad I'm here. I'm able to make the thing work this week, and I thought I should just make the connection like a lot earlier. Um, okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you for being here with me today. So, for those of you who are new and you are watching this either as a recording or coming on live, my name is Shamala Tan, and I am a spiritual teacher first and foremost. And I've been doing psychotherapy work for a while now. The main focus of what I do is the integration of spiritual psychology with spirituality, because having been on the spiritual path for so long, over 2 decades, I have, I mean, there's been ups and downs, and I've made hundreds of mistakes along the path, and I can see, where um, the mistakes are, where people have gone wrong. So my goal really is to um, make my classes as public as possible, and hence on YouTube. The other reason is, you might know this already, in the current wave of how things are going, there are so many apps out there created, AI created, kind of spirituality and religion, which I feel is complete nonsense, because how can you grow spiritually from an AI, right? I mean, how can you learn wisdom? How can you learn any of the things that we learn through AI? You definitely cannot, grow spiritually that way. And it seems to be the direction that world leaders are taking, and pushing people into the AI arena, and that includes the religion, spirituality. They want everything to be taught um, by AI, and almost like trying to eliminate the human element in all that we interact. So, a lot of my reasons for really going public with my classes, I used to do them, via Zoom with my classes. They're all paid classes, but I feel an urge inside me. There must be a push to do something more public. And for that reason, I'm trying to grow my YouTube. If you know anyone interested in spirituality, and you want to share my content, please ask them to subscribe to my channel, because the more views we get, the more we can reach out to people. My I feel, as a spiritual person, our greatest enemy, and I hope I don't get censored here on YouTube, our greatest enemy right now is, I'm not against AI, first and foremost. I feel it is very useful, but there are certain boundaries that we need to establish. And when it comes to psychology, and when it comes to spirituality, it cannot be AI run. There's no way, right? I mean, AI is just a curator of knowledge, curator of information. It doesn't have the wisdom, and it cannot possibly help you to grow spiritually or address issues, and and all of that. And so I am very inspired to fight this in a way, not as in going to war, but fight this by providing information, letting people know that there is real concrete information from human beings versus AI, right? To grow spiritually and to work on the psychology. All right. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of why I'm so passionate. I have so many people asking me, why are you going, why are you doing on YouTube? Why don't you just, do carry on via Zoom? It took me a while to come to this decision, and I'm glad I'm doing it because the way things are going, even physical books are going to be eliminated, because when things are digital, when books are digital, the content of the books can be changed. They can be edited, and even history can be edited, and we certainly do not want that. All right. So, I mean, this has happened in human history, right? Time and time again. Um, if we think about it, like burning of books and blah blah blah, right? In different um, era or epochs of time in human history, and this has been happening thousands and thousands of years. And the last thing we want is for history to be edited. You know, our children are going to, they're going to learn history differently. They're not going to have the same context. And even I'm Gen X. Those of you Gen X, you may be aware also that you know there is content out there, history, that we are not getting the full picture, right? They have been edited. So my so my fight in inverted commas, really is to get information out there, to teach, to be on this platform, to reach out to as many people as possible. Yeah, so that's my aim. Okay, so back to today's topic, part 2 of inner child shadow work. Now, if we observe the world, right? Most people in the world are majority, all right, a large majority of the world's population are run by a child consciousness, or at best, teenage consciousness. Most of us have not matured beyond the teenage consciousness. Most of us are still due to lack of education, lack of proper guidance, we're still operating from teenage consciousness, especially when it comes to emotional growth, emotional development. Just look at how we are interacting with each other in romantic relationships. It shows us how teenage we are, right? When we, when you get into a fight with your partner in a romantic relationship, most of the time, the emotional energies or the emotional state gets the better of us. And we all, just say things like, oh, we're just being emotional. And that's why I did this or did that. But the reality is, if we're going to look at the psychology of it, is that the reality is we were just operating from a teenage, we were not adults, in the fights, in the arguments. We feel angsty, right? When we fight, we attack, and we either attack or we ignore, and we give the silent treatment. All these are teenage behavior, right? I mean, if we want to be really honest with ourselves, we are really, especially in relationships, operating out from teenage consciousness. So most people have not grown up from that, and there is a need for growing up, especially during this time in human history, right? We really need to grow up. We really need to wake up and do the right thing. I read recently a stat somewhere that 1/3 of the world's population are now suffering from mental illness. 1/3. All right, and we cannot pretend to think that people we know, right, people with status, people with high rank, people who are CEOs, CFOs of companies, or people who are well known, are popular on social media, we cannot pretend that they are psychologically well. Many are not. All right. Even people who are running countries, right, world leaders, they are not psychologically well. That's the unfortunate state. And the thing is, it's like the blind leading the blind, right? I mean, if you can't see any better, how would you know? How would you know, right? If you can't see any better, then you're going to think that a person with status, a person with money, a person with many degrees would be the person with most knowledge or should have more power in decision making process. That's how most people think. Very rarely do we see people judge, in inverted commas, judge a person by their psychological health. And I feel that it's time for change. We really need to change this. We really need to see people as they truly are. And it begins with self, right? It begins with ourself. How well are we on a psychological level? How well are we in our decision making process? Are we still operating as children? And we're like, if you just observe people, right, running around, pretending to be adults in adult body, but running with child consciousness or teenage consciousness, making life-changing decisions from a child consciousness. That's how the world has been run. And I feel it's gotten to a point of, being so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous that it's so funny, that all I can do is laugh about it, right? So, so why, part of the reason why, I want to help people to grow up, right? To develop their consciousness and to do inner parenting and how important. I also did a search, right? Any hashtags that I use on any social media, when I type in inner parenting or inner parent, the number of times that this hashtag or this phrase has been used is almost like only by thousands, which is not even a 5-figure, which is really interesting. It just shows that no one knows what to look for. Even in the search engines, right? No one knows what to look for. So I want to normalize the term inner parenting. I mean, it's been used, of course, in psychological circles, but not enough. People talk about the inner child. Not enough people talk about inner parenting. So we need to learn how to inner parent, right? So when we can inner parent, then we can go out there and truly show up in the world and do what is needed and coming from, and we thrive, right, in a healthy way. Now, the unfortunate thing about being healthy psychologically and emotionally is you have to put up with unhealthy people around you. That's the unfortunate thing. All right. And that's why sometimes time alone is important, right? To retreat back into your space, because you do have to put up with most of the world's population who are still operating in an unhealthy way. Right? So that's how it is. And it's a test of your inner parenting skills, test of your strengths as well, right? So it's a win-win, right? Even though it can be challenging, it is still win-win, okay? So those of you who attended my previous part 1, we covered a lot about, I talk about the importance of inner parent, inner child, and all of that. Now, what I would like to, if you have not watched it and you just happen to jump into this particular recording, I would highly encourage you to watch part 1, or else part 2 is not going to make much sense to you. Okay? Now, I'd like to talk about the different aspects of the inner parent. So I've talked about the firm and loving inner parent, right, in part 1. The firm and loving inner parent is the ideal inner parent that we should all be striving for. And granted, it's difficult to find living examples of firm and loving inner parents because we grew up in our own environment where our parents are not entirely balanced or healthy, and so we don't have very good examples, right, of firm and loving inner parent. And of course, if we read books, we watch people on YouTube, we watch movies, oftentimes we can pick up some of the archetypal features of a firm and loving inner parent. So a firm and loving inner parent is really a good balance between unconditionally loving and yet being very firm and pulling the brakes and disciplining the child or our own inner child in a way that is safe, that is healthy, right? So it is a constant balancing act because we need to know, when are we disciplining self, when are we staying on track, when should we be a little bit relaxed about it, when, right? So it is almost like learning to ride a bike when you're doing inner parenting, because you need to find that fine line so that you don't cross over one over the other. Okay. And so a firm and loving inner parent would do basically three things: nurturing, protect, and boundary setting. Okay, three important things. Nurturing. So this is where we nurture self, right? We nurture self when we say, okay, I need time for self-care. We nurture self. And then we educate ourselves. We read books, we do meditation, we do the right things. We feed ourselves well on all levels, right? Whether it's spiritual feeding, emotional feeding, mental feeding, physical feeding. We feed ourselves with clean food, clean stuff, clean water, right? It has to be clean. That's the role of the inner parent. And then we protect ourselves. So when we find ourselves in an environment that is less than healthy, then we need to really either make a decision to stay or to go, or circumstances doesn't allow you to leave, then we need to be protective towards self, right? And be on guard. On guard doesn't mean hostile. On guard, which means polite, right? But knowing when to give in. Now, we see on social media a lot where we have a lot of entitled narcissistic people running around these days. They are completely, run by the inner child, right? And they are completely run by inner child, and they may switch also completely run by the critical inner parent, right? So they switch between these two personalities within them. And when we are caught in a situation where we meet someone like this, what do we do? How do we protect ourselves? We can either walk away, not engage, right? But if you feel that it is something that you need to put your foot down, then you need to protect yourself by not allowing the words or the vibration of this person to hurt you. Just let it, put on your protective grid. Imagine a golden bubble of protection around you. Let the words just slide down. Okay, slide off the bubble, and do not internalize those words. And then, of course, boundary setting, right? Have very clear boundaries with this person, or whoever it may be, whether it is the unreasonable people that we meet who are entitled, who are narcissistic, or it could be your partner, it could be your loved one, it could be even your own children. All right, setting clear boundaries is very important. So these three things: nurturing, protect, right, and setting clear boundaries. So that's the role of the firm and loving inner parent. So on a daily basis, we do need to do this, right? So from the time we wake up, to the time we go to bed, the firm and loving inner parent has to be working, right? And most of the time in the background, and would be awakened when there's a need to. So let's say you are taking the public transport, you're going into work, and then you encounter unreasonable people. The firm and loving inner parent has to step in, right? And if you happen to wake up from the wrong side of bed, firm and loving inner parent disappeared. And what's going to happen if you meet unreasonable people, then you're going to get into a fight with them, right? And that's where your inner child is like throwing a temper tantrum as well. And so that's why the firm and loving inner parent has to be present at all times. And even in the workspace, in the work environment, right? Always think of these three things that the firm and loving inner parent has to perform, okay? Now, we have firm and loving inner parent, then we have the critical inner parent. Now, if you think back in your own childhood, you will have, you possibly, most people usually, this is the pattern. You grow up in a household where one parent is more critical than the other. You will have one parent who is more dominant, the other parent who is more submissive. That's usually the pattern, right? And the more dominant one is usually the more critical one. Usually. Not necessarily all the time, okay? Usually. Because the dominance may not necessarily be coming from a negative dominance. It could be a positive dominance. A positive dominance is someone who is, for example, you grew up with a father who is firm and loving, do the right thing. So automatically this figure, this father figure will look like he is dominant versus a submissive mother. All right. But a submissive mother also has the dark side, the shadow side, which can manifest as the devouring mother. Okay. So I'll talk more about that later on. But let's talk about the critical parent. So the voice that you hear inside you that is critical of you is a voice that you adopted from your own real critical parent. Now, if you happen to grow up in an environment where both your parents are not around, maybe relatives or your grandparents looked after you, there will be one who is more critical than the other, than the rest. Or if you grew up in like in the care of the state, where maybe an orphanage or something like that, then there will always be one critical voice that you kind of adopted. So when you adopt these voices, it becomes a part of your split personality, because these voices are programmed inside you. And so that critical inner parent voice is going to come up time and time again to tell you how you're not good enough, how you are not doing enough, basically telling you that you are not enough. The critical voice is not a reasonable voice. The critical voice is just very toxic. It's a toxic voice that wears you down, that tires you out, that makes you feel small. All right. Now, I want you to think right now of a situation in your life as a grown-up, as an adult, where you entered into a situation, whether in a workspace or in a family situation or even in a social space, where you felt like a child in the environment, where you felt like you were small in that environment, then there's a high chance that you interacted with someone who triggered the critical inner parent voice, right? So if you find that you are in the pattern where whenever you are in a space of someone who is strong, someone who is, and this person may not necessarily be critical. This person is just strong. This person is firm. It can trigger something inside you. And it can make you feel scared. It can make you feel small. You feel small and you feel like a child. And you lose your confidence. And this person may not even have to say anything. This person just needs to have a certain stature in life, right? And we see how people behave in public, right? When they meet someone of power, like, let's say, I don't know, like king and queen, or some heads of state, um, or some CEO or some celebrity or something or other, right? You see how people behave towards them. They project the parent image onto them, right? And they, in that projection, they the voice inside them, the critical voice inside them, says that you are not equal to these people. You are less than. You are not enough. You do not match up. So then people automatically position themselves as less than, and they look up in adoration towards these people of power, because it has triggered the critical inner parent. And this can happen even in religious organizations, right? I've seen and I know, uh, people, religious heads or religious people who are seen as leaders, but when I look at them, I know that something is wrong with them psychologically, and yet people are giving their power away, like, adoringly, taking in everything that this person is saying as if it is gold, as if it is wisdom, when it may not necessarily be. Okay, so it's so important that we do not position ourselves as less than, no matter who this person is. They can say there's some reincarnation of some guru. Who cares? You are still an equal, right? In stature, but your consciousness may not be, and this is something you need to work on, right? Your consciousness may not be equal. So it tells you, whenever you're around people and you feel less than, it tells you that you need to do something about it, because it means that your consciousness needs development, your consciousness needs growing up. This means that the firm and loving inner parent has to play a more active role in your life and in your consciousness. Okay. And other ways in which the critical inner parent comes up is, like, besides telling you not enough, it can stop you from doing what you want to do. It can stop you from doing what you think is right, and it will, stop you, because it will introduce all kinds of, like, what ifs. You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and all of that. And let me give you an example. Some of you may know this. I during the pandemic and all of that, the lockdown pandemic, I did not receive a single vaccination. I did not believe in it, so I did not do it. I am the only person in my entire family and in my almost immediate, in my social circle, maybe there are one or two who are also not, but most people are, right? And the the number of criticisms that I get from people, right, is really quite mind-blowing. The things that people say, the things that they and I have to keep myself in a safe space, right? This is where my nurturing, protective inner parent came in, setting that boundary and, like, okay, I draw the line there, right? I do not have to interact with this particular person or engage with this person, because obviously this person did not do their homework, did not do any research, did not go and find out more. And when I ask questions, they get agitated. Like, if I ask, do you know what is in your body? They get really triggered and agitated, right? And so I thought, okay, I'll leave it as that. Don't pick a fight with me, and I won't pick a fight with you. That's how I drew my boundary. So that, like, those 3 years over the pandemic was pretty challenging in that sense, right? And then, so the role of my firm and loving inner parent came in, really have to step up, really, really stepped up, because if not, I would give in, right, to the criticism, to all the voices, right? And 99% of voices is just criticism. And that one tiny voice, right, I have to listen, I have to make it grow, I have to make it light up and be my main guiding light. And that's my firm and loving inner parent, the nurturing voice, the protective voice, and the boundary setting voice. One of the toughest thing I had to do, because if your surrounding is such that majority of the people are, the way they are, then it's tough. But it helped me, right? So, it's a win-win, as I've said earlier on. At the end of the day, you benefit from it. Okay, so that's one example. So in your life, think about times when you make a decision about something, but the critical voices just come in trying to stop you. Now, if you give in and if you regretted that, then it's important for you to really sit down and have a communication with your inner child and, heal the wounds. Because the inner child would have felt really abandoned and wounded in that process. Okay? So this is something really, really important to work through. Because the wounds do not go away over time. People often say, when we get hurt, when someone passes on, time heals. No, that's a complete lie. Time doesn't heal. Working on yourself heals, right? Time just makes the memory much more distant, but the wound is still there. It doesn't heal. Time doesn't heal. Okay? If there's one takeaway from this live stream that you can take away with you, remember this. Time doesn't heal. Don't believe the bullshit. Time makes the memory fades, but the wound is still there. And that's why, oftentimes I have clients coming to me and they say, oh, this happened so long ago. I thought I healed. But why is it that when I'm talking with you, I am so emotional? And, they go into this whole, they cry and the whole body just, can't wait to release the emotions because they have not healed. 20 years have passed, but no healing done. The time makes you forget. It makes you forget the memory, but the body doesn't forget. The body is still holding on to the wounds. So do not believe it when people tell you time heals. It doesn't. Okay? It makes you forget, but the wound is still there, and it will come up again when the opportunity arises. Okay? So think back in your own life when you have made a decision, or anything else that, for that matter, that has happened in your life, where you, instead of doing or allowing the inner parent to do what is right for you, you override it because other people, the critical voices, your own critical inner parent has come in to sabotage you, and you listen to that voice. Okay? Now, there's another aspect of the inner parent, and that's called the missing inner parent, or the wishy-washy, or the submissive inner parent. And this is an example that you have seen in your own household as well. One of your parents, or people who were caretakers, they were, there'll be someone there, right, who is submissive, and that submissive parent taught you that the best thing to do is to avoid, is to keep quiet when you're not supposed to keep quiet. Of course, the right time to speak up, right time to keep quiet is very important that we recognize that. But to keep quiet at the most important time, at the time when you must speak most, that's a submissive inner parent. And the submissive inner parent will also avoid issues, not deal with them, afraid of them, right? And the submissive parent is not going to be, is the one that doesn't allow you to shine and makes you feel less than. So in a way, the critical inner parent and the submissive inner parent, they are like a team, right? Like a tag team. If this one comes up, this one will stay down. This one comes up, this one stays down. So they are a tag team. But the voice eventually that you need to listen to will be the firm and loving inner parent. Okay, so the submissive inner parent goes missing, and in the dynamics, right, of all the split personalities that we have within our own consciousness, pertaining to inner parent, inner child, you will see that they are always dancing, right? So we have this tag team of the critical inner parent and the submissive inner parent. Now, when the submissive inner parent comes up, the chances of the bratty inner child, right, the inner child, the obnoxious inner child, the bratty one, the spoiled one, right, will surface also, because submissive inner parent is there. So the spoiled inner child. So the spoiled inner child comes up usually when we do whatever we want, despite, I know, no matter what is happening, and we don't care about other people. We're selfish. We don't give a damn about, other people's needs. We only care about ourselves. This is the narcissistic self. The narcissistic self, or the narcissistic personality, is equal to the spoiled, bratty inner child. They're completely acting out from the inner child consciousness, right? So you will see that in yourself, right? So if you go into complete self-indulgence, you feel awful, and then you decide that, okay, I'm just going to gorge down on junk food. Who is that eating the junk food? The one eating the junk food is the bratty one, it's the spoiled one, just doing whatever it likes, right? And no clear boundaries. Submissive inner parent is not there to establish boundaries. The submissive parent is actually afraid of this bratty child. And we all have these within us, right? So we have the bratty inner child playing up, doing what it's like, what it likes, scolding people and doing, horrible things. And being a public nuisance as well, right? And so how do you then tame this bratty one? Again, it's always the firm and loving inner parent that has to come up and establish boundaries. And of course, this bratty inner child is not going to immediately just conform, right? It's just going to, do what it likes. So, for example, in your life, a part of you, you need to exercise. And then the part of you said, no, I'm going to stay in bed. Now, who is that says wants to stay in bed? That's the spoiled inner child, because you have given in, right? The submissive inner parent has given in. And the firm, and you are not listening to the conscious person that you are, the pilot that you are, is not listening to the firm and loving inner parent. The pilot in you decide to listen to the spoiled inner child and do whatever you want, right? And you have thrown nurturing self out of the window. And so the bratty inner child is responsible for many things and many decisions in our lives, from the things we eat, from the things we watch, from how we spend our money, from things we say to other people, in the choices that we make in life partners, in so many things, And when if you think about a decision that you have made in regret, maybe you spend too much money, too much time in a certain decision, you know fully well that's the inner child, right? You have listened to the bratty inner child, the spoiled inner child, to do whatever it likes, and then it's just on a wild rampage. Okay, and then we also have the wounded inner child. The wounded inner child is the one that is so, if you want to give it like an archetypal icon, right? It's like the mouse, right? The mouse, the mousy part of you. You may have noticed this when you're in certain environments. You either you come up like as an extrovert, very, very confident, right? You feel almost naughty in that situation. That's the bratty inner child. In certain social situations, the mouse surfaces, right? If you explore, why is it that sometimes this part of my personality comes up when I'm in that environment, another part of my personality comes up, you need to check the environment and the people and what it triggers in you and how you show up, right? Because your environment and the people in the setting will trigger different personalities within you to surface. And if you are a grown-up, you go back to your family home, a lot of the times the child surfaces. You behave and you speak like the child because you are back in your family home, and you have not, if you have not learned to parent yourself, you automatically become the child in that environment. And I hear of people, in their 40s, in their 50s, still fighting with their parents because the parents also haven't grown up, right? So what happens is you have, even though they are parent and child, right? They are, already considered senior citizens in their 50s, and parents maybe in their 70s and in the 80s, they're still fighting like teenagers. So both are still in teenage consciousness, right? And that kind of setting. So because, no one has grown up. And so check yourself, right? What is my environment, and in this environment and in the people that I'm interacting with, what is being triggered and who am I in this situation, right? So let's talk about the mousy one. The mousy one is the wounded one. And the wounded one oftentimes would show up in social setting. It just tends to be very quiet. It's timid, right? Looks like he or she may not look like he has courage. But in intimate relationship, the mousy one can surface as being so wounded and being hurt by every single thing that is being said to him or her. And sometimes it could just be a statement or a joke, and yet the mousy one is so sensitive, right? It's a heightened. Sensitivity has heightened. So the bratty inner child, the mousy inner child, both come up a lot in your intimate relationships. And you need to catch yourself. Whenever your partner says something or does something, and these two, either one, come up, you need to ask yourself, ooh, what has been triggered, right? And it has nothing, most of the time, it has nothing to do with your partner. It has everything to do with your past. The past wounds, not healed, not addressed, not looked at. And if you have a fight with your partner, right? And if you were to record the conversation and then you listen to the conversation again, it will sound as if exactly like two kids fighting or one parent fighting with one child. That's the dynamics. That's the psychological dynamics in relationships. All right. The mousy one is the wounded one. Okay. I want to address this question. Can healing also happen like layers of onions? Yes, it can. Healing can happen in layers upon layers. And in fact, I would say it happens like this all the time. Because this, if we're talking about inner child and shadow work, is something that we have to do for the rest of our lives. It's constant. There are layers. And some of these wounds are so deep that sometimes we may not even remember. And sometimes they are not wounds, right, from childhood. They could also be a wound from adulthood, but it has wounded the child within you. Do you see the dynamics, right? So not inner child wounds come from the part of you when you were young. Sometimes the inner child wounds we can wound our inner child as grown-ups when we are in situations and we did not listen. The pilot did not choose to listen to the firm and living inner parent, and then it did not protect self, and inner child got wounded. It can happen, and it happens more often than we realize, especially in intimate relationships. Okay, so healing happens in layers. Definitely, we do need to peel off the layers of the onion. Okay. Now, so it looks like we have so many personalities, right? We have the pilot, which is the conscious self. We have the firm and loving inner parent. And then we have all these other side players. The side players, we have, the bratty inner child, we have the mousy inner child, we have the critical inner parent, and then we have the submissive inner parent. And don't forget, we also have one more inner child, the balanced inner child, right? So the balanced inner child can only happen and be in existence when you listen to your firm and loving inner parent, right? And there are days in your life where you feel, oh, I feel really balanced today. Why? You feel really balanced. You can see the joy. Like the example I gave you last week was, looking at a rainbow and feeling like, wow, it's so beautiful, and feeling the joy and feeling your heart burst. That's the inner child, right? That's the archetypal energy of the balanced inner child. And so we have all these split personalities within us. And we constantly have to, the pilot of your consciousness, right, which is you, will have to choose. Who are you listening to? Where are you operating from? And when you catch yourself operating from one of these unhealthy parts of yourself, firstly, you need to manage yourself at that point in time, at that moment, right? Let's say in a workplace, or when you're with your partner or with your friends, you need to really manage yourself, and then after that, do the process, right? Like I suggested, there are two parts to personal growth and development: managing yourself at that point in time, and then doing your inner processing after that in your private time. Okay. So if we want to call, I want to give names to the balanced inner child, and that would be the authentic inner child. That's the real inner child. That's the seed energy that we are all made of. The authentic inner child. The authentic inner child is the seed energy that we're all made of within our souls. Right? When we call ourselves a child of God, what are we saying? We're calling the authentic self. We're not addressing the bratty one. We're not addressing the mousy one. We are actually addressing the authentic one. Okay. What about adults who are afraid to make decisions? Is that coming from inner child? Yeah. If you're afraid to make decisions, then it means that the pilot of consciousness is listening to the submissive inner parent. It could also be listening to the critical inner parent, because the critical inner parent may be saying, you're always making wrong choices. You're always making wrong decisions. Then you go like, oh, I'm really afraid. Right? So then the mousy inner child will say, okay, let's stay in a corner and hide. Let's not show up in the world. It's safer hiding in a corner. So bear in mind that all of these personalities, right, the inner child, the inner parent, they all they're constantly there, right? And these split personalities, they switch about, right? And they play up in our consciousness. They switch about constantly. It's constantly moving. It's not just one over the other. So let's say, taking your question in this context, right? When you ask me, is this coming from the inner child? I wouldn't say that it's completely coming from inner child. I would say it is a combination, right? Like in my explanation, I said that it could be the submissive inner parent decide, I'm not making a decision. It could also be the critical one that says you are making wrong decisions all the time. It could also be the inner child that decides, okay, this is just too scary, I'm just going to hide, right? So these three roles, right, in the context of your question, it's like it's morphing from one to the other, and you're listening to all these, oh my God, I am confused. I don't know what decision to make. So then I would say, clear your mind, right? Sit in meditation, Be very clear and invite the firm and loving inner parent to come in, to be the decision maker, to help you to make a decision. Okay? So okay, having said that, right, do the meditation. Having said that, if this is an issue that you face, then you need to process this. Like, ask yourself, when I was growing up, who was the decision maker in my family? What makes me afraid? Let's say the decision maker in the family is the mother, and the father usually doesn't make any decision because the father is the peacemaker and trying to appease the situation and doesn't want to be involved, doesn't want to make things difficult, as they say, right? And then allows the mother to make all the decision. And as a child, you watch this and you go like, okay, if I make a decision, then I become like my mother. I don't want to become like my mother because my mother is dominant, my mother is critical, so I don't want to be that. But if I am like my father, if I prefer to be like my father who is submissive and decide not to make a decision, being a peacemaker, okay, maybe that's safer. So now I'm going to follow that example. And if you follow that example, you also don't feel good about yourself because you feel like you're not showing up. You feel like, oh, that's not very good for me either. Right? And so all of these things, right, the input that we take in plays a big part in how we are as grown-ups, in our decision-making process, in the kind of partners we choose, and it becomes tough, right? It becomes tough. So sometimes people ask me, the more awakened you are, isn't it more difficult? I say, yes, it is. Because it just means that you have to do more. You have to take more responsibility. And you have to put up with unhealthy people. That's the part I dislike most personally, right? That's the part I dislike most. So oftentimes I have this very clear boundary, like, I'm going to stay away. I don't want to be involved in this. I don't want to join them for social gatherings or whatever. It's just too unhealthy for me. I can do this maybe once or twice a year, but not more, right? So that's, the inner conversation that I have. But by and large, you have more responsibility. So for example, if you are in a relationship with someone and you are taking responsibility, you are doing your healing, you're doing the psychological work, you're seeing a therapist, you're working with someone, you want to get healthy, but your partner is not. It does not necessarily mean that you're not a good match. It just means that you have to work harder. Unless, of course, your partner is, narcissistic, psychotic, then, of course, leave. Like what I did. So, then you have to leave, right? But if not, if, they're reasonable, they just have stuff that is unhealed, then you have more responsibility. You have more responsibility to do the right thing, to make sure that, now, bear in mind, you're not there to be their parent. You parent yourself. And then you have to do the right thing by the relationship. They have to learn how to take care of themselves. But if you are in a space where you are operating from firm and loving, you can parent your inner child well, no matter how your partner is operating and no matter how they're behaving, you are not allowing yourself to go to the level of a teenager or a child in your fights. You are being reasonable, right? Unless, of course, your partner is abdicated all responsibility and behaves like a child completely in every situation, then there is a problem, right? And this means that you are no longer a couple. You're a parent and child. And a lot of work is needed, right? So your partner then needs to seek help. Okay. Any questions from that example that I just gave? Okay, I'm going to answer this one. Since these roles are constantly switching, it sounds like we need a great deal of self-awareness to even catch these voices. Yeah. How to strengthen the pilot and make her the main lead. The pilot is basically you, right? You with the awareness. And of course, we cannot have constant self-awareness 24 hours a day, right? It's not possible. We do slip up. And when you do slip up, it is fine, right? It is fine. If you do slip up, you just say, oh, the pilot, right? That's you. Uh-oh, I just slipped up. I just said something I shouldn't have said. Then the firm and loving inner parent, you allow the firm and loving inner parent to come in to advise you, like, what should I do? Should I apologize? Should I, make up for it? And usually the firm and loving inner parent will give you the right advice, right? So you make up for it. And then, then you get on with it. Forgiveness of self, apologize, move on. And then you learn from there. It takes practice, of course, right? The self-awareness, it takes practice. Now, the thing also is, part of the reason why I'm so passionate about teaching this is because self-awareness is really the key to so many things as we enter this new phase of human consciousness, right? I mean, I'm sure you know by now, there's some weird things happening on this planet, right? What is happening, right? People talk about mass ascension. Not really. How can a bunch of kids ascend? No way. The energy is supportive of mass ascension. That's the potential. But people are not doing the work that is required for mass ascension. So we have to start from self-awareness first. So self-awareness is really the key. From self-awareness, then we can really talk about ascension. Ascension, not yet, okay? So that's why the self-awareness is actually the basic key. When you have self-awareness, then you can make better choices. Then you know, right, all these different personalities. Then you know what's going on in your inner consciousness. You're not just on autopilot. You're not just following whatever everybody is telling you. You don't just, you read the news with discernment. You're not just taking in information, the news, and thinking it is Bible truth. You do your research. You find out more, right? You do not take anything for granted when you have self-awareness. You are more awakened when you have self-awareness. And when you are self-aware, there is no turning back. You cannot say, I'm going to stuff it all back in a box. No, this life is not very fun because I'm seeing everything for what it is, and it's not very pretty. And that's why most people prefer to be asleep. They prefer not to be self-aware because it's much more comfortable. There is less work to be done. You just live a zombie life, just eat, sleep, socialize, do fun things, go work, whatever. Don't need to think too much. But that numbs your consciousness. Your consciousness becomes numb and you cannot grow spiritually. Despite what many spiritual people are saying. Many spiritual people are walking around numb. But they think they're growing spiritually. That's another off tangent, right? Another part of the consciousness that has split off and telling them they are growing spiritually when they have not done any psychological work. Their consciousness is coming from teenage consciousness. They're still behaving like teenagers. They have not grown up. But they think they're growing spiritually because a part of their split personality, right? Another archetypal energy has come up to tell them, making things more grand than it really is. Like, oh, they've grown spiritually. They are this, they're that. They are so in tune with spirit or whatever. The grandiosity. The spiritual ego, do not underestimate the spiritual ego. It can make you believe in things that are so delusional. It's poison. And spiritual communities are being poisoned. And that, for me, is extremely, extremely sad. When I see the poison spreading in spiritual communities, even in mainstream religion. Yes, staying in the Matrix. Exactly. If you have not watched Matrix, go watch it, right? Especially the first one. The first one is the best one by far, right? is staying in the matrix. So spiritual people staying in a matrix, thinking they're growing spiritually, the make-believe reality, right? And the world we're heading towards now, they want to make this matrix so like they want you to create your avatars on social media. They want you to create the cartoon version of yourself. They want you to do all these things because they want you to be so identified with this identity that you lose who you really are. When people lose who they are much easier to control. So self-awareness helps you to grow, but it's not so fun. Because when you see reality as it is, it's not as fun. You know, you see the ugly side of human nature, you see the greed, you see exactly why they're doing. So, you know, if you watch the news, when they highlight this thing happening in news, you know there's something else happening in the background. This is a distraction. Right now in the States, Trump arrested, right? There's something else happening. Something else is happening that nobody's watching. The mass is just watching this. Anywhere in the world, when you have a news about something, they're highlighting, like in Singapore context, right? They highlight the opposition party, something else is happening. You need to watch for that. You need to dig for the news. Do your research and find out what are they trying to distract me? There's a lot happening out there. So if you follow me on my social media, especially my Instagram and my business Facebook, in the stories, because they disappear after 24 hours, but that has not stopped them from barring me, banning me, because I've been sharing so much about all these things in my stories. Whatever they don't want you to see, I will post it. Because people need to know. People need to wake up. The self-awareness is key. All right. I'm going to address some questions about inner child. But if you have more questions about what I just said, maybe I can do a live Q&A about all of that. What I said, you know, like the matrix, the all of that. I would like to do one. I feel that it is an important one that people learn to question, learn to have self-awareness as well, okay? I received this question. Is it possible for someone to heal the inner child without doing shadow work? No. Because shadow work is a big... doing inner child healing, inner child wounds, is really digging into shadow work. They go hand in hand, okay? So we can't run away from it. Now, I also want to clarify that when we talk about shadow work, we are talking about the meaning of shadow is really the parts of self that we are not aware or we cannot see. That's why it's in the shadow, it's in the darkness, because we cannot see. And when we throw light or we take it out from the shadow, it's in the light, it's no longer in the shadow. That's what shadow work means. Shadow work is really going into parts that are unseen, unknown, right? Shadow work is not like looking for dark entities in the body. That's not the focus. All right, it's the psychological work that is the focus. Okay, now next question. How can I overcome resistance or fear that comes up when I try to connect with my inner child? This is a very interesting question, isn't it? Because they are, you know, a part of the personality or the split personalities is coming up in different ways. How can I overcome resistance or fear that comes up when I try to connect with my inner child? So, chances are the submissive inner parent is at play here. The fearful, submissive inner parent, right, is saying, no, 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 it's too scary. And there's so much damage and so much wounds to look at. I'm not ready. The reality is, when can we ever be ready? We cannot be ready, right? We can only, when you have awareness that this is the thing that you need to do, then do it. That's when you're ready. Okay, so to address the resistance, I would say you try it with meditation first. First, start the meditation with firm and loving inner parent, and then allow the firm and loving inner parent to invite the inner child. I'm not sure whether you have done the visualization with me when you ask this question, how can I overcome resistance or fear that comes up? So I would say one of the best ways perhaps is to do a session where I take you through the process, where when there's someone supervising you, it's far easier to go through the process. So it's something you might want to consider. I mean, if you find that the resistance or the fear is just too big and you find it very difficult to connect with your inner child, then you need supervision. Okay, so this question here on YouTube, what would be the best way to do shadow work in your opinion? The best way to do shadow work is with someone under supervision. The reason is because you can't see what you can't see. You will know what you don't know, right? So let's say if you're working with me in shadow work, usually it depends on resistance level that you have as well. So I usually work at the level I feel it's not going to push the client too far. So let's say I ask you a question because I'm trying to help you to fish the information out from the shadow, but you resist and you give an excuse as to why it's not this, it's something else. And if I press on, right, and you feel triggered or irritated, or it does something to you, then it's really, there's something there, right? But sometimes I'll let it go because I have to sense whether we are really pushing a very, very wounded part that you may not be ready for. Then I have to try another method to address this, right? So the way I work with my clients is I work with different methods, and I do not just work with one method and make the client adapt. I have to adapt to the client when we do shadow work. So the best way, in my opinion, is to work under supervision, because in shadow work, it is very difficult, especially at the start, because you won't know what you don't know, and you don't know what's in the shadow unless someone else can see it, and usually someone else outside of you can see it. And I feel in shadow work, if you can at least get a good head start, then the person you work with can supervise you and give you a wealth of or homework that you can do. Then those things you can work on your own after that, with the homework. And then when you come back to the supervisor, you go through what you have processed, and then the supervisor, right, will direct you in the right direction again and do more work. So the digging part and all that, right, you need to be on your own. But when you need feedback and all that, you actually do need someone. It's very difficult, right? Personally, I'm in process constantly, right? I do work with someone. I work with Jung analyst, someone who's very well trained in Jung psychology. And I feel it's so important, right, for my mental health. I'm doing this work, so obviously I have to be healthy mentally. So whenever I'm in process, it becomes much more consistent in my sessions. But when I'm not in process, then the break, I may take like 2 months break, but I'll come back to it. So I've been doing this, I don't know, years. I'm constantly in, it doesn't end. The work doesn't end, right? Because we have to constantly keep digging. And sometimes, even in shadow work, we also do dream work, right? And the first live stream I did was dream interpretation. So dream work is a very, very important part of shadow work as well. And sometimes the dreams just get more and more complex. The more work you do, the dreams just get so complex, and it's very hard for you to self-interpret. And this is where, in shadow work, you have to work with someone who is able to, see from the outside, and then can guide you in the process. Okay, I hope that helps. All right, I'm going to answer one more question that I received. How can I differentiate between my intuition and the protective parent aspect of my inner parenting? This is a very good question. How can I differentiate between my intuition and the protective parent aspect of my inner parenting? My first answer to you is, does it matter where it's coming from if the advice given is good advice? Right? I mean, it could be your intuition, it could be a protective, doesn't matter. If it's if the message or whatever you got is protecting you for good reason, then use it. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. But it's a good question in the sense that a lot of people are so mixed up in what is intuition. I did 1 minute reels on my Instagram, basically because there's so much misunderstanding about intuition and listening to higher self, right? So one of the things that I addressed was, if you receive a message, a lot of people say, oh, I received a message from my higher self tells me to do this, do that, do this, do that. I said, wow, your higher self is so detailed. And usually your higher self is not that detailed, okay? It's a prompting. In the reel, I question, how do you know it's your higher self and not your psychotic self? How do you know it's a higher self and not your critical inner parent? How do you know it's a higher self or not another aspect of your inner child? How do you know it's a higher self and not your shadow self? Just because you receive a message doesn't necessarily mean it comes from your higher self. And people take it too far when they say, oh, my higher self tells you, you should do this, this, this. I would reply and say, it's none of your higher self fucking business, right? What I do is my business. Your higher self has nothing to do with my life, right? So people go too far, when they do that. And then, just because they say it's the higher self, we all have to put everything down and listen? No, right? I mean, especially if the person is not well, psychologically, why would I listen to them? I will not take advice for that. But this is a very good question, right? Because people are so confused about intuition, about these voices, and people want to explore and become psychics or channels without doing the psychological work. Big, big red flag. Okay? If you don't do psychological work, you cannot channel properly. You cannot. There's no way. There's no way you can channel good advice. No way. Okay? So I hope that has answered the question. Any more questions from people on YouTube? No? Okay. Well, we've run over time. I really enjoyed this. I will definitely do more live streams. I will let you know when the next one is. We will, again, probably come in, maybe not immediately, but I will definitely want to talk about the inner child again because, there's a whole wealth of information, knowledge that people can learn. And so, but I'll give this a break for now, so you digest whatever we have shared in part 1, part 2, work through the information, work through, do your process, and then I'll come back to inner child work again. And the next live stream, if you have something in particular that you'd like me to cover, drop me an email, let me know. I will let you know what the next topic is. I have not made a decision. I have a whole list of topics I want to cover, but I also want to see what works best at what particular time, right, to cover a topic. So I'll let you all know. So have a wonderful time, everyone, and I will see you again in my next live stream, or catch me on my social media, especially my new Instagram channel. It's called Spiritual Thought Coach. And you can, yeah, my stories. I have lots of stuff that I usually share about what's going on in the world as well. Okay, so I'll see you then. Bye.